The child stopped, not because someone told him to, not because the group slowed down. He just stopped. Footsteps echoed around him, stone under shoes, whispers, a tour guide's voice drifting somewhere ahead, the distant creak of an old wooden door. But the child heard none of it. His gaze locked onto a single point, a wall, nothing special about it. Same stone, same color, same century as every other wall surrounding it. Then he raised his hand, not quickly, not hesitantly, as if he were simply finishing a movement that had already begun long ago. "Here," he said. One word. No one stopped, no one clapped, no one reacted, because at that moment there seemed to be nothing to react to. But months later, a void would be discovered at that exact spot. And the wall would stop being just a wall, because the child had never been inside this building before. He had never studied architecture. No one had taught him what he knew. And yet, he knew how the stones were moved, which tools were used when the workers rested, how the sunlight struck the structure at certain hours, as if he had been there. And so a question quietly emerges. When a human body dies, it disappears. But what happens to memory? Some cultures call it return. Others call it continuity of consciousness. Science has not yet chosen a word. But some stories don't wait for permission. That morning had started like any other for Dr. Jonathan Hale. He had walked through York Minster countless times before. He knew the weight of the stone. He knew how silence behaved in places like this. This wasn't meant to be a discovery, just a preliminary visit. Routine, academic, notebook in his bag, pen in his pocket. No expectations, until the child stopped. 6-year-old Ethan Moore had fallen behind the group. At first, Hale didn't notice. Children drift. They lag. They get distracted. But Ethan wasn't looking around. He was standing still. Hale slowed his pace, then stopped completely, because the child had raised his hand, quietly, deliberately, and spoken. Here. One word, not a question, not a guess, an indication. Hale looked at the wall. The stonework was uniform, the joints precise, no visible repairs, no irregularities. His academic instincts didn't immediately engage, because academically there was nothing there. But something felt wrong. Ethan wasn't looking at the wall. His gaze wasn't on the surface. It was beyond it, as if the stone weren't an obstacle at all. Hale didn't ask a question, because asking would have formalized the moment. And some moments, before they are formalized, need to be allowed to exist on their own. Ethan lowered his hand, returned to his mother's side, as if his task was complete. The group moved on. Light shifted. Voices returned. But Hale stayed behind for a moment longer. That evening, no report was written. No photograph was taken. But at home, when Hale opened his notebook, he wrote a single word in the center of a blank page. Why? The wall looked the same the next day. No darker, no lighter. When Dr. Jonathan Hale returned to York Minster early that morning, the first thing he did was change his route. Tourists weren't allowed in yet. The corridors were empty. His footsteps echoed alone against the stone. He stopped at the same spot, same wall, same surface. He reached out and touched it, cold. But that wasn't unusual. Stone that hadn't seen sunlight in centuries was always cold. Hale scanned the surface carefully. A crack, a repair mark, a shifted joint. Nothing. From an academic standpoint, there was no reason to stand there. And that was exactly why he did. That same morning, Ethan was at school. Math class, addition and subtraction. The teacher wrote a problem on the board. Ethan looked down at his notebook. He didn't write. He held the pencil still for a moment. Then, without lifting his eyes, he drew a long line along the edge of the page. The boy next to him leaned over. "What are you doing?" he whispered. Ethan glanced up. "A path," he said. Then he stopped talking. The line wasn't straight. It curved, slowly, upward. Hale couldn't focus that day. He opened a journal article, closed it, picked up a book, turned pages without reading. His thoughts kept returning to the same place. The wall. That evening, he pulled out old notebooks. Years of field notes, lectures, half-forgotten drafts. One sentence caught his eye. It wasn't highlighted. It wasn't marked. Just written there, quietly. Some structures are completed not when they are built, but when they are remembered. He couldn't remember when he'd written it. But now, it felt uncomfortably familiar. That night, Ethan was home. His mother, Sarah Moore, was in the kitchen. The television was on. A modern crime series. Glass buildings, steel frames. Ethan watched for a moment, then frowned. "That's wrong," he said. Sarah turned around. "What is?" "The wall," Ethan replied. "You wouldn't place the stone like that." He didn't explain. He just turned away from the screen and sat at the table. Sarah didn't press him, because this wasn't the first time. And every time he said things like this, his voice carried the same calm certainty. That night, Hale added another sentence to his notebook. This time it wasn't a question. It was a note. Children do not always learn. Sometimes they return. He didn't underline it, because underlining would have meant commitment. 3 months. On a calendar it's barely noticeable, but some waiting stretches time. Hale moved slowly. No urgency, no dramatic language. Forms were filed. Preliminary assessments completed. Coordinates marked. The wording was careful, neutral, cold. The word child did not appear once. Only this. Request for subsurface structural analysis to verify internal consistency. No objections were raised. No excitement expressed. The request was placed on hold. From the outside, Ethan's life didn't change. He woke up at the same time, went to school, did his homework. But his teacher noticed something. Sometimes Ethan paused in the middle of a question. Not like he didn't know the answer. Like he knew. Too much. The pencil would hover above the page, then the answer would come, but always with a brief gap, as if his mind were moving between 2 places. At home it was stranger. Some evenings, Ethan stood by the window, looking at the sky, not counting stars, not searching for the moon, just looking. One night, Sarah finally asked, "What are you doing?" Ethan didn't answer right away. Then he said, "Checking." "Checking what?" Ethan shrugged. "If everything's still in place." During those months, Hale read obsessively. Old debates, unresolved theories. One paper stood out, published the previous year. Internal transport systems in Gothic cathedrals. One sentence refused to let go. Some solutions are not only drawn on paper, but carried in the body. Hale closed the article. He knew the author, a cautious scholar. That sentence didn't sound like him. At the end of the 3rd month, the letter arrived. Plain envelope. Brief message. Permission granted for ground-penetrating radar analysis. Date: May 2021. Hale placed the letter on his desk, didn't open it again, because waiting was over. Now, they would look. May mornings in York Minster are quiet in a different way. The air feels heavier. Sound doesn't travel as far. Even footsteps seem to hesitate. The cathedral was closed to visitors that day. Only a handful of officials were present, a small technical team, and silence. The radar equipment was carried in carefully, cables laid out so they wouldn't touch the stone more than necessary. No one spoke loudly, as if raising a voice might disturb something that had been sleeping. Dr. Jonathan Hale stood facing the wall. Same place, same stone. But now, it no longer felt ordinary. This time he wasn't alone. Ethan stood a few steps behind him, next to his mother. No one asked him to move forward. He did anyway. He stopped in front of the wall. He didn't raise his hand this time. He just looked for a long moment. Then he spoke. A little higher, his voice was steady, certain. Not a guess. Not a suggestion. A correction. Hale turned toward him. "How much higher?" he asked. Ethan thought. Not quickly, not automatically. Then he lifted his arm and pointed slightly above an adult's eye level. "Here," he said. The first scan began. Lines appeared on the screen. Signals went out, returned. Solid stone. The engineer glanced at the display. "Nothing unusual," he said. No one reacted. The machine was repositioned. A second scan. This time the pattern shifted. Barely. But enough. The engineer stopped. "Hold on." The device was adjusted again. Same angle. Same distance. The third scan started. And this time, something changed. The screen showed an interruption. Not stone. Not uniform. "There's an anomaly," the engineer said. His voice remained calm, but his posture didn't. Roughly 2 by 3 meters. Hale realized he was holding his breath. "Natural?" someone asked. The engineer paused. That pause lasted longer than any explanation could have. "No," he said finally. That word echoed down the aisle. No one smiled. No one wrote anything down. Because this wasn't a moment for confirmation. It was a threshold. Hale stepped back. He looked at the wall again. The stone hadn't changed, but his perception had. The wall no longer felt solid. It felt like a cover. Ethan hadn't moved. His eyes were still on the stone, but his expression wasn't curious. It wasn't surprised. It was familiar, as if he wasn't discovering something, as if he was noticing what had been missing. Sarah leaned down slightly. "Do you feel anything?" she whispered. Ethan shook his head. "No," he said, then added quietly. It was already there. That sentence never appeared in any report, but everyone who heard it remembered it. Because some sentences don't carry information. They carry memory. When York Minster closed that evening, the wall was still intact. No stone had been removed, no surface altered. But everyone present knew one thing. There was a space behind it. And that space was no longer just inside the building. It had opened somewhere else, too. In thought, in doubt, in questions that didn't yet have names. Nothing happened immediately after. Hale insisted on that. Rushing would mean mistakes. Mistakes meant scars. New permissions were requested. Preservation boards informed. Technical assessments written. Every sentence chosen carefully. Because every sentence could open a door. Nothing was opened right away. That was deliberate. Stone like this didn't forgive haste, and once disturbed, it never truly returned to what it had been. Requests moved slowly. Preservation boards debated wording. Engineers argued over millimeters. Weeks passed. When approval finally came, it came with conditions. No drilling beyond necessity. No removal of stone. No exposure to air longer than required. Observation only. The cathedral was closed again that morning, earlier than usual. Quieter than before. Fewer people this time. Everyone present knew why they were there. No one spoke about it openly. A single, narrow opening was prepared. Just 3 centimeters wide. Small enough to protect the stone. Large enough to see inside. A fiber optic camera was attached. Lights dimmed. Monitors powered on. The camera moved forward. Slowly. At first there was nothing. Darkness. Then dust. Fine particles suspended in the air, floating as if they had never been disturbed, as if time itself had been holding its breath. The light pushed further in. Edges appeared. Corners. Smooth stone walls. This wasn't a natural cavity. It was shaped. Measured. Intentional. The room was small, exactly as Ethan had described. The camera advanced another few centimeters, and then something appeared. Metal. Worn. Darkened with age, but unmistakable. An iron chisel. Then another. Wood followed. Handles darkened by countless hands. Polished not by care, but by repetition. No one spoke, because everyone in the room noticed the same thing at once. These tools hadn't been thrown inside. They had been placed. Carefully. Deliberately. As if someone had stopped, looked around one last time, and made sure everything was where it belonged. More objects came into view. Measuring cords, plumb weights, a small wooden square, a ceramic water vessel, everything intact, everything ordered. This room hadn't been abandoned, it had been closed. Dr. Jonathan Hale didn't take his eyes off the screen. Finally he spoke. "Is this what you meant?" He didn't look at Ethan when he asked, but Ethan answered, "Yes." His voice was calm, almost relieved. Then he hesitated. "Just a fraction. The others," he added. "They were a bit farther back." No one asked what he meant, because the way he said it didn't sound like description. It sounded like habit. Hale felt it then. This space wasn't just a storage room. It wasn't just an archaeological find. It was a moment that had been sealed, and moments like that don't disappear. They wait. The camera was withdrawn carefully. The opening sealed again. Nothing was removed. Nothing touched beyond what had been seen. Silence returned to the cathedral, but it wasn't the same silence as before. This one carried weight. Hale placed a blank sheet of paper on the table, set a pencil beside it. "If you want," he said. He didn't finish the sentence. Ethan looked at the paper for a long time. Then he picked up the pencil. At first, the lines were uncertain, childlike. But then something changed. The movement smoothed. The hesitation vanished. A long, curved line appeared. Then another. A spiral, not closed, not decorative, ascending, purposeful. Hale leaned closer. This wasn't imagination, it was a root. "What is this?" Hale asked. Ethan set the pencil down. "Inside," he said. "That's how we moved the stones." No one commented on the tense he used, but Hale noticed. Ethan took another sheet. This time he drew tools, sharp edges, thick bodies, wood paired with iron. "Chisel," he said. "Mallet." Hale swallowed. "Where did you learn this?" Ethan shrugged. "I didn't," he said. "It was just like this." Hale looked at the drawings. The proportions weren't random. The angles weren't guesses. These weren't things taught in school. These weren't things picked up by accident. And yet Ethan wasn't explaining. He wasn't justifying. He was remembering. Finally, Hale asked something different. "Who else was there?" Ethan stopped drawing. He placed the pencil down. "We were," he said. One word. But it carried many. The room was quiet. Not the kind of silence that comes from people holding their breath, but the kind that settles in after something irreversible. Dr. Jonathan Hale studied the spiral Ethan had drawn. It wasn't decorative. It wasn't symbolic. It was functional. "This is a ramp," Hale said slowly. "Isn't it?" Ethan nodded. "It turned," he said. "Upward, inside the pillars." "How wide?" Hale asked. Ethan didn't answer immediately. He closed his eyes for a moment, not as if searching for words, but as if aligning something. "Wide enough for 2 men side by side," he said. "And a sledge." He paused. 3 L's. The word landed heavily in the room. Hale looked up. 3. "What?" "L's," Ethan repeated. "That's how we measured it." Hale felt his chest tighten. The L was a medieval unit of measurement. It wasn't taught in schools. It wasn't casually mentioned in documentaries. "Where did you learn that word?" Hale asked carefully. Ethan frowned. "What word?" "L." Ethan looked genuinely confused. "I don't know," he said. "I just know it." Hale pulled out another diagram, a familiar one, a theory proposing a massive external wooden scaffold wrapping the entire cathedral. "This," Hale said, "is one of the models scholars believe was used." Ethan studied it. Longer than before. Then he shook his head. "No," he said. "Why not?" "Too much wood," Ethan replied. "More wood than stone." "That wouldn't make sense," he added quietly. "No one would choose that." Hale felt his fingers tremble as he wrote. That exact criticism, the inefficiency of timber use, was the cornerstone of modern objections to the full scaffold theory. Ethan hadn't learned it. He had reasoned it. Or worse, remembered it. Hale tried to steady his voice. "Tell me about the tools." Ethan's posture changed. He leaned forward slightly. "We used iron chisels," he said. "They weren't very strong. You had to strike the same place again and again. And we used wooden mallets, he continued, to protect the iron. Iron on iron is too hard. The tip breaks. Hale closed his eyes. That detail, wooden mallets instead of metal, was something only specialists discussed. "How did you move the heavy stones?" Hale asked. Ethan didn't hesitate. "Soap." Hale blinked. "Soap? Green soap," Ethan said. "We spread it on the wood under the sledges. Without it, the wood bites into the ground. With it, the stones slide." Hale sat back. Years earlier, a physics journal had published a study demonstrating exactly this technique. It wasn't common knowledge, it wasn't popular science, and yet Ethan spoke of it like muscle memory. Hale lowered his voice. "Ethan," he said, "how do you know all this?" Ethan looked at him. His eyes didn't wander. They didn't search. "I remember," he said. "I remember being there. I remember my name was different. I remember the smell of the river at dawn, the bread we ate at midday. I remember watching the stars at night to make sure the passages were aligned." Hale felt something shift inside him. This wasn't imagination. There were no monsters, no glowing visions, just work, stone, measurement, fatigue, memory. Ethan's voice softened. "I remember everything." Behind him, Sarah pressed her fingers together. She had heard these words before, but hearing them spoken calmly, to a scholar who had no reason to indulge fantasy, made them heavier, more real. Hale reached for one last photograph. It showed an elevated passage inside the cathedral. "Do you recognize this place?" he asked. Ethan studied it, then pointed. "There's a door," he said. Hale frowned. "A door?" "Behind the wall," Ethan replied. "On the right side, about halfway up. There's a room behind it. We stored tools there during the build. When we were done, we sealed it." Hale wrote down the exact position. He did not tell Ethan that no records mentioned such a room. He simply nodded and kept listening. Dr. Jonathan Hale didn't tell Ethan what the records said. He didn't say that no architectural plans mentioned a door there. He didn't say that no excavation logs referenced a chamber at that height. He just wrote coordinates, height, orientation. Then he asked more questions. Not leading ones, not corrective ones, listening questions. The next morning, Hale contacted colleagues from the cathedral's preservation office. He didn't mention a child. He didn't mention memory. He described a structural inconsistency, a potential sealed cavity, a location worth verifying. The response was cautious, professional, skeptical, but not dismissive. 3 weeks later, permission was granted for a targeted scan. The day of the scan was clear, bright but cool. The choir aisle was closed to visitors. Only the research team was present. Engineers unpacked portable radar equipment. Officials from the Heritage Board stood nearby, arms crossed. Watching, Ethan stood beside his mother. Quiet, ordinary, small blue jacket, worn sneakers. Nothing about him suggested he was about to unsettle centuries of certainty. "Show us," Hale said softly. Ethan walked along the eastern wall. His hand brushed the stone. Slowly, as if reading something no one else could see. Then he stopped. "Here," he said. He raised his arm, pointed slightly above an adult's head. That's where the door is, he added. Behind there. The engineers exchanged looks. They positioned the device. The radar sent electromagnetic pulses into the stone, measured the return. Solid stone had a signature. Empty space had another. The scan was run once, then again, then a third time. The data appeared on the screen. Hale leaned in, his face drained of color. There it was, a void, exactly where Ethan had indicated, roughly 2 by 3 meters, too regular to be natural, engineered, deliberate. One of the officials stepped forward. "What does this mean?" he asked. Hale spoke slowly. "It means there is an unknown chamber behind this wall," he said. "And this child told us exactly where to find it." The official looked at Ethan. Really looked at him. "Where did you learn this?" he asked. Ethan shrugged. "I remember," he said. "I was there when we sealed it. We put the tools in first. Then we fitted the stones so carefully you wouldn't see the seams unless you knew where to look." No one contradicted him, because the radar data did not allow it. Hale knelt beside Ethan. "What tools?" he asked. Ethan didn't hesitate. Iron chisels, wooden mallets, measuring cords, plumb weights, a wooden square, and water jars. We always needed water, he added, to drink and to mix the sand and mortar. Hale's notes grew longer. Those were exactly the items found in other medieval tool caches. But this chamber, this one had never been opened. If Ethan was right, it was untouched. There was a problem. Opening the chamber would require drilling into historic stone. Approval would take months, possibly longer. Bureaucracy moved slowly when the past was involved, so Hale chose another path. If Ethan truly remembered, his knowledge wouldn't end here. 3 days later, they stood at a site not open to the public. An old workers' settlement, ruins of earth huts, blackened fire pits. This was where laborers had lived during the cathedral's construction over 700 years earlier. Hale pointed to a long, narrow foundation. "What is this?" he asked. Ethan walked around it, looked down. "This was the bakehouse," he said. "They made bread for the workers. Thousands of loaves, every day." He pointed to circular depressions in the ground. "Stone ovens," he added. "Those were the fires." Archaeological records confirmed it. Hale pointed elsewhere. "And here?" "They cured fish and meat," Ethan said. "The workers needed a lot of food. Thousands of men worked on the minster. They weren't slaves. They were paid, with coins and food, good food," he added. "My rations were enough to feed my family." Hale swallowed. That detail matched modern consensus. Medieval cathedral builders were skilled, paid laborers, not forced hands. Knowledge gained from decades of bone analysis, not something a 6-year-old should know. "Tell me about the work day," Hale said. Ethan sat on a low stone wall, looked up at the towers. "We worked when it was cool," he said. "Early morning, late afternoon. At midday we rested, in the shade. Some men sang. Some played games with stones and sticks. I liked watching the master builders," he added. "They checked the alignment every day. The building had to face east. If the alignment was wrong, everything was wrong." Hale took out a compass. "Show me east." Ethan didn't look at it. He raised his arm, pointed. almost perfectly. Astronomical east, not magnetic. "How do you know?" Hale asked. "From the sun," Ethan replied, "and the stars." "When you check alignment every day," he said quietly, "you stop thinking about it. You just feel it." As the sun lowered, Hale asked the question he had been avoiding. "Ethan," he said, "what happened to you back then? How did you die?" Ethan's expression changed. Not fear. Sadness. "I don't remember dying," he said. "I just remember being very tired, more tired than usual. My chest hurt. It was hard to breathe. I lay down to rest." He paused. "And then I was somewhere else. Not a place with ground or sky. Just something else. And later," he said, "I was here. In this life." He looked at his mother. "I'm glad I came back," he said. "I missed being alive. The sun, the stars, and building something that lasts." Dr. Jonathan Hale knew this case could not remain private. Not anymore. What Ethan demonstrated wasn't just memory, it was operational understanding, the kind that comes from repetition, from mistakes made and corrected, from hands that had done the work. Hale contacted the architect whose controversial theory about internal transport systems had divided the field years earlier. He sent a short message. No explanations, no context, just a video clip. Ethan speaking, describing the ramp, the width, the turning radius, the logic behind it. Hale did not mention the speaker's age. The reply came 3 days later. Subject line, RE, internal ramp system. The message was brief, direct. The description aligns with my hypothesis with remarkable precision. The speaker understands the engineering logic, not just the concept. The mention of a 3L width is particularly significant. That is the minimum required for load rotation mechanisms. Whoever this is, they are not guessing. They know what they're talking about. Hale read the message twice, then replied with a single sentence. The speaker is 6 years old. The response came almost immediately. That's not possible. A video call was scheduled for the next day. The architect appeared on screen surrounded by books, models, unfinished sketches. He looked tired, curious, skeptical. Then Ethan appeared, sitting quietly beside Hale. The architect began carefully. "Can you explain how the ramp turns at the corner?" he asked. Ethan leaned forward. He looked at the screen, then shook his head slightly. "That angle's too steep," he said. The architect frowned. "What do you mean?" "If it's that steep," Ethan continued, "the ropes snap when the weight shifts. You need it flatter," he said. "Otherwise the load pulls sideways." The architect froze. He turned away from the camera, grabbed a model, adjusted the angle, typed quickly. Silence. Then, "You're right," he said. The words were barely audible. "The flatter angle reduces lateral stress on the ropes," he added. "I missed that." He looked back at the screen. This time, not at Hale, at Ethan. "How did you know that?" he asked quietly. Ethan shrugged. "That's just how we did it." After the call ended, Hale sat still. For a long time. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't pattern matching. This was correction. The kind only someone who had failed before could make. Hale documented everything. Dates, statements, drawings. He cross-referenced Ethan's explanations with archaeological findings, structural models, and historical records. They matched, again and again and again. By autumn 2021, the case file was no longer thin. It was heavy. In November, final permission arrived. The chamber inside York Minster could be opened further, not dismantled, not excavated, but examined. A fiber optic camera would be inserted deeper. A single chance, minimal disturbance. Hale stood alone in his office that evening. The city lights of York glowed beyond the window. He opened his notebook, turned to the first page, the one with the single word written months earlier. Why, he added another line beneath it. Not a question, a statement. Because some things are not learned. He paused, then finished the sentence. They are remembered. The cathedral was sealed again that morning. Not officially. Not with announcements. Just quieter than usual. The fiber optic camera was prepared with even more care this time. No one rushed, no one joked. They all understood something now. Whatever lay behind that wall was not just stone and tools, it was a moment that had been waiting. The opening was reused. No new damage, no new risk. The camera slid in slowly. The monitor filled with darkness, then light. The chamber appeared again, but closer, clearer. The stone walls bore faint markings, not inscriptions, not symbols, working marks, chalk lines, scratches from repeated contact, measurements made, erased, made again. Hale leaned closer. These weren't decorative, they were practical. The language of work. The camera tilted downward. The floor came into view. Footwear impressions, pressed into dust that had not been disturbed for centuries. Not footprints exactly, wear patterns, places where weight had shifted, where men had stood, waiting. Ethan was very quiet. He stood beside his mother, hands at his sides, not watching the screen, not anymore. His eyes were closed. Hale noticed. "Ethan?" he said gently. Ethan opened his eyes. "It's enough," he said. The room stilled. "What do you mean?" Hale asked. Ethan hesitated. "Just slightly." Then, "We closed it like this," he said. "The last time." No one spoke, because that sentence didn't belong to a 6-year-old. The camera moved a little farther in. At the back of the chamber, something else appeared. A recess, smaller, deliberate. Inside it, a single wooden object, too decayed to identify clearly, but shaped by hands. Hale felt his throat tighten. "What was that?" he asked. Ethan looked at the screen for the first time, then away. "It held the cord," he said. "The measuring cord." "For the last check," Hale swallowed. "The last check of what?" Ethan answered without looking up. "Alignment." Sarah felt her breath catch. "Ethan," she said softly. "You don't have to." "I know," he replied. He sounded calm, but tired. The camera stopped moving. No one asked it to continue. No one needed more. The opening was sealed again. Carefully, respectfully, as if closing a door that had been opened only because it had asked to be. That evening, Hale reviewed the footage alone, frame by frame, every mark, every shadow, nothing supernatural. No visions, no impossible artifacts. Just consistency, the kind that doesn't come from imagination. He wrote one line in his report, a line that would never be published. This chamber was not forgotten. It was left. Later that night, Sarah found Ethan sitting on his bed. He wasn't asleep. He wasn't drawing. He was just sitting. "Are you okay?" she asked. Ethan nodded. "I think so." Then he said something very quietly. "I don't think I need to remember anymore." Sarah sat beside him. "Why?" Ethan shrugged. "Because it's finished." Ethan's teachers noticed it first. The pauses stopped. The pencil no longer hovered. He answered questions quickly now, like other children. At home, he stopped correcting buildings on television, stopped watching the sky at night. The drawings changed, too. No spirals, no ramps, just houses, trees, cars. Sarah didn't celebrate. She didn't mourn either. She just watched. Hale noticed it later, when Ethan struggled, for the first time, to name a part of the cathedral, the Triforium. He hesitated, then guessed. Wrong. Hale said nothing, but he felt it. Something was leaving. One afternoon, Hale asked gently, "Do you still remember the ramp?" Ethan frowned. "The ramp?" "Yes," Hale said. "Inside the pillars." Ethan shook his head. "I don't think so," he said. Then, after a moment, "I think that was someone else." Hale closed his notebook that day. For the last time. The change completed itself quietly. There was no final moment. No dramatic loss. Just absence. Ethan no longer paused when he spoke, no longer searched for words that once arrived fully formed. He forgot dates first, then terms, then places. When asked about the chamber, he looked confused. "What chamber?" he said once, genuinely. Sarah watched carefully, not with fear, with attention, because whatever had been there had not been taken. It had simply stepped aside. The last fragment came unexpectedly. A rainy afternoon, Ethan and Sarah were walking past York Minster again. Not a visit, just passing through. Ethan stopped. Not suddenly, not sharply, just slowed. He looked up at the towers. For a moment, Sarah's heart tightened. Then Ethan spoke. "They finished it without me." Sarah didn't respond right away. "Finished what?" she asked. Ethan thought. "I don't know," he said. Then he laughed, a normal laugh, and kept walking. That night, Hale reviewed his notes one final time. He didn't add anything. He didn't correct anything. He simply read. What struck him most was not what Ethan had known, but how little of it had been extraordinary. No prophecies, no visions, just labor, measurement, fatigue, the memory of work. Hale submitted his official report. Careful language, neutral tone, no mention of consciousness, no mention of reincarnation, just data, structural findings, tool placement, alignment consistency. The chamber was recorded, mapped, resealed. It would not be opened again. Not soon. Perhaps never. Months later, Hale was asked in a lecture, "Do you believe what happened?" He paused, longer than usual. "I believe," he said, "that some knowledge is older than learning." That was all. Ethan grew. He learned math, then history. He struggled with things other children struggled with, succeeded where others succeeded. He remembered nothing of ramps, nothing of soap or chisels. But sometimes, very rarely, when he held something heavy, something that required balance and patience. He adjusted his grip, just slightly, as if guided by a habit he couldn't explain. Nothing supernatural remained, only alignment, only instinct, only the quiet sense that something had once passed through and done its work. When a body ends, the work may not. Some things are built once and remembered twice, and sometimes, when the remembering is no longer needed, it lets go.